Have you ever wondered if the day you were born holds the key to your destiny? What if your birth date could tell you not only who you are, but what challenges lie ahead, what karmic patterns you're destined to repeat, or what ultimate purpose you're meant to fulfill? Imagine waking up one morning, scrolling through your news feed, and coming across a mysterious post. It reads, "Your birth date isn't just a number. It's a map of your life's karma." Do you dare uncover it? Intrigued, you click on the link, unaware that this simple action is about to change everything. This isn't just a typical horoscope or astrology reading. No, this is deeper. It's a profound revelation of the cosmic forces that have been silently shaping your life from the very moment you were born. Your birth date, the day, month, and year you entered this world, is like a secret code. And Elon Musk, a man who has redefined technology, space exploration, and the way we think about the future, is about to discover exactly how much this code influences his life. But why Elon Musk, of all people? What does a visionary like him have to learn from something as mysterious and ancient as karma? The answer isn't simple, but it is undeniably intriguing. Elon Musk's life has been one of unexpected twists, groundbreaking innovations, and immense personal sacrifice. Yet, as his story unfolds, we realize that the answers to some of his most perplexing questions, about failure, success, relationships, and his true purpose, could be found in something as seemingly mundane as his birth date. What if your birth date could reveal the truth about your life's purpose and the karma you've accumulated over the years? It's a question that lingers in the air, creating a tension that pulls you in. As you keep reading, you can't help but wonder. What if there's something more to the world than just random events and choices? What if there's an underlying pattern that connects everything together, including Elon Musk's incredible journey from South Africa to Silicon Valley? This is the story of how Elon Musk stumbled upon a cryptic message that led him to question everything he thought he knew about his own life. A simple birth date, something we all share, turned out to be more than just a number. It was a symbol of his karmic path, the forces that shaped his journey, his relationships, and his rise to the top of the tech world. And perhaps, just maybe, it holds the secret to the next phase of his extraordinary life. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As we dive deeper into Elon Musk's story, let's first understand the man behind the legend. He was born on June 28, 1971, in Pretoria, South Africa. His early years were far from ordinary. Raised by his mother, May Musk, a dietitian and model, and his father, Elon Musk, an electromechanical engineer, Elon was always surrounded by intellectual stimulation. But life wasn't easy for him. In fact, it was often difficult. From a young age, Elon was extremely curious, always wanting to know how things worked. But he was also introverted, finding solace in books and computers rather than in friendships or socializing. He was bullied relentlessly throughout his childhood. His peers didn't understand him. And his parents, although loving, were often distant in their own ways. Elon's father, in particular, was known for his strict and somewhat harsh parenting style, which left a mark on young Elon's psyche. Despite the challenges, there was a fire in Elon Musk that couldn't be extinguished. He dreamed of changing the world, of creating something bigger than himself. But at that time, he didn't know how or even why. All he knew was that he had an insatiable desire to build, to create, to innovate. His first taste of the tech world came at the age of 12 when he taught himself computer programming and created a video game called Blaster, which he sold for $500. It was a small step, but for Elon, it was a glimpse into what his future could hold. However, as a young man, Elon felt a sense of alienation. His parents' divorce and his own sense of not fitting in left him feeling like an outsider. But this feeling of being an outsider was something Elon would come to embrace later in life. It became part of his identity, fueling his drive to prove himself and to make an impact on the world. It was this very sense of being misunderstood that pushed him to challenge the norms and go against the grain. In his late teens, Elon moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. It was during these years that he began to form the ideas that would later become Tesla, SpaceX, and PayPal. But even then, his vision was not widely accepted. Many of his peers, professors, and even business mentors saw him as an idealist, someone with lofty ideas that would never work in the real world. But Elon didn't care. He believed in his ideas with a passion that no one could shake. And in the end, that passion would lead him to create some of the most revolutionary companies of the 21st century. But was it simply his vision and intellect that got him there? Or was there something more, something hidden beneath the surface, tied to his birth date, his karmic path? The question began to linger in Elon's mind. He'd always been a curious person, seeking knowledge about the universe, about technology, and about the deeper meanings of life. But now, in the midst of his success and his ever-growing list of accomplishments, he couldn't help but wonder if there was something he was missing. Could it be that his birth date, the number on his birth certificate, held the key to understanding his true purpose? What if everything he had achieved, every breakthrough, every failure, and every triumph was part of a larger, cosmic plan that had been set into motion the moment he was born? And so began Elon Musk's quest for answers, not just about his business ventures, but about his soul, his karma, and the deeper purpose that might be written in the stars, or perhaps, on the day he entered this world. To understand the full weight of Elon Musk's journey, we need to go back to where it all started. His roots, his upbringing, and the relationships that shaped him into the man we know today. Elon Musk, born on June 28, 1971, in Pretoria, South Africa, came into a world that was, by no means, ordinary. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege, and his early years weren't filled with the luxuries that many would expect from someone who would one day change the world. His father, Elon Musk, was an electromechanical engineer, and his mother, May Musk, was a dietitian and a model. Although they were both intelligent and ambitious individuals, their marriage was fraught with tension and eventually fell apart when Elon was just 9 years old. The divorce, though painful, would have a profound impact on Elon's sense of self and his relationship with both of his parents. It left him with a feeling of emotional isolation that would persist throughout his childhood. Elon Musk, Elon's father, was a man of contradictions. He was brilliant, but also distant and sometimes emotionally unavailable. Elon has spoken openly about how his father could be manipulative and emotionally cold, and their relationship was strained throughout Elon's life. Elon's high expectations, harsh methods of discipline, and the overwhelming pressure he placed on Elon to succeed weighed heavily on the young boy, sowing seeds of rebellion and determination. On the other hand, Elon's mother, May, was an entirely different figure. She was nurturing, supportive, and strong, despite the challenges she faced as a single mother raising 3 children. Elon has often praised her for her unwavering belief in him, even when the world seemed to doubt his abilities. May's influence on Elon was profound. Her independent spirit, combined with her drive and resilience, was something that Elon would carry with him throughout his life. She taught him not just how to dream, but how to turn those dreams into reality. Yet, despite the contrasting influences of his parents, Elon still felt out of place in many ways. Growing up in South Africa during the apartheid era, he often found himself at odds with his environment. His interests in technology, computers, and space exploration made him a loner in a society that was more focused on traditional expectations for young men. In school, he was often bullied for being different, for being too smart or too strange. This feeling of being an outsider would persist into adulthood, pushing him to seek a place in the world where he could forge his own path, free from the constraints of social norms. But it wasn't just the struggles with his family and society that defined Elon's early years, it was his innate curiosity and determination to create. From a very young age, Elon had a passion for understanding how things worked. When he was just 10 years old, he developed a love for computers and self-taught himself how to program. By the age of 12, he had built and sold his first video game, Blaster, for $500. This moment marked the beginning of what would become a lifelong obsession with innovation and technology. As a teenager, Elon moved to Canada to attend Queen's University before transferring to the University of Pennsylvania in the United States. It was during his time at Penn that his entrepreneurial spirit truly began to take shape. He was determined to build something groundbreaking, something that would change the world. But even then, he faced skepticism and doubt from those around him. His professors questioned his ideas, and his peers saw him as an idealist, a dreamer who had no grasp of reality. Yet Elon persisted. He dropped out of Stanford University after just 2 days to pursue his entrepreneurial ambitions. His first venture was Zip2, a company that helped newspapers create an online presence. Although the company eventually sold for nearly $300 million, it was just the beginning of a series of ventures that would solidify Elon Musk as one of the most influential figures in the world. During these formative years, Elon was beginning to learn a very important lesson: the world may not always believe in you, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't believe in yourself. And while his achievements were certainly monumental, it was also the personal struggles, his difficult relationship with his father, the bullying he endured as a child, the emotional toll of his parents' divorce, that played a role in shaping Elon into the man he would become. But it wasn't just his upbringing and early struggles that would define his life, it was the relationships he would forge along the way. One of the most important relationships in Elon Musk's life has been with his mother, May. Despite the challenges they faced, May Musk stood by her son with a quiet but fierce dedication. It was May who encouraged Elon to follow his passion for technology, to pursue his dreams, even when it seemed like the world was against him. Her belief in him never wavered, and as Elon rose to success, he often credited his mother for being a constant source of inspiration and support. Elon's relationship with his father, however, remained complicated. There was a deep sense of tension between them, and even as Elon became a multi-billionaire, their bond was strained. Elon Musk's rigid, demanding nature left Elon with a feeling of inadequacy that he struggled to shake. Although Elon has since distanced himself from his father, the lessons he learned from their relationship, both good and bad, helped shape his perspective on life and business. As Elon's ventures gained momentum, so did his personal life. He married Justine Musk, his first wife, with whom he had 5 children. The relationship, though filled with love at the beginning, eventually fell apart due to the immense pressures of Elon's burgeoning career and his obsession with building his empire. Justine would later write about her experience in a memoir, detailing the toll Elon's ambition took on their marriage. But despite the end of his first marriage, Elon's personal journey was far from over. He would go on to marry Tallulah Riley, and later, Grimes, the Canadian musician with whom he shares 2 children. Each relationship, whether it succeeded or failed, played a significant role in Elon's understanding of love, family, and the balance between his personal life and his professional endeavors. As we look back on these early years, it's clear that Elon Musk was shaped by his relationships as much as his intellect. His struggles with his father, his close bond with his mother, and the ups and downs of his marriages all contributed to the person he would become. But there was something more, something deeper, that would come to light in the years ahead. Something that connected his birthdate to the very fabric of his being, and ultimately, to the karmic path he was destined to follow. As Elon Musk's success began to grow, so did the challenges he faced. The world was watching as he built PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, and so much more. But success often comes with a price. Behind the headlines of rocket launches and electric cars was a man grappling with personal conflict, unrelenting pressure, and the weight of his own ambitions. Elon was now a visionary entrepreneur, an icon in the world of technology. He was in a position where people saw him as a genius, the driving force behind some of the most innovative companies on the planet. But what the world didn't know was that Elon was struggling with something much deeper, a battle within himself. The immense pressure that came with constantly being in the spotlight weighed on him heavily. The stakes were always high. For every triumph, there were moments of crushing failure, and each one felt like a blow not only to his career but to his sense of self. The constant need to prove himself, especially to those who doubted him early on, became a source of internal conflict. Elon often found himself at odds with his own mind, torn between his ambition and the desire to connect with the world around him. The first major internal conflict Elon faced came during the early days of SpaceX. In 2008, after years of relentless work and countless failures, SpaceX's future was hanging by a thread. The company had just launched 3 unsuccessful rockets, and Elon was running out of money. His personal finances were in jeopardy, and the pressure to succeed was suffocating. At this point, Elon had invested nearly every penny he had into the company. He was on the verge of bankruptcy. It wasn't just a financial crisis, this was a battle for Elon's identity. SpaceX was his dream. His purpose. But as the launches failed and his bank account ran dry, Elon began to question whether it was all worth it. The pressure from investors, employees, and even his own self-doubt weighed heavily on him. He had always been someone who pushed boundaries, but now, with his back against the wall, the question loomed, was it worth losing everything to chase a dream? This is where his karmic journey began to take shape. Elon's birth date, which was believed to hold some kind of deeper significance, seemed to be tied to the lessons he needed to learn in his life. As the pressure mounted, he began to search for answers, exploring more about the universe, fate, and destiny, hoping that there was some cosmic force guiding him. His struggle, his failures, seemed to be part of a larger karmic pattern, one that he could not fully understand yet. The next wave of internal conflict came in the form of his relationships. Elon had always struggled with finding balance in his personal life. His relationships were constantly overshadowed by his work. His first marriage to Justine Musk, though filled with passion in the beginning, eventually unraveled under the strain of his obsessive work habits. Elon was known to throw himself entirely into his companies, often neglecting his personal life in the process. This imbalance, however, came at a high emotional cost. The toll on his marriage, and later his relationships with his children, became one of the most difficult personal struggles he would face. The breakup with Justine Musk marked a turning point in Elon's life. Not only had he lost the woman he loved, but he was also left to question his priorities. Was he sacrificing his personal happiness for his vision of the future? And if so, was it worth it? The failure of his marriage mirrored the failure of his ventures at the time. But in the midst of these failures, Elon continued to push forward, driven by an insatiable need to prove something, not just to the world, but to himself. In fact, his personal life and professional life were so intertwined that one could not be separated from the other. Elon's drive to succeed was so consuming that it often led to feelings of loneliness. His inability to connect with people on a deeper level left him isolated. His second marriage to Tallulah Riley, though initially hopeful, faced similar challenges. Elon's relentless drive and focus on his work meant that his relationships were always in second place. This internal conflict between his personal desires and his professional ambitions only added to the weight of the karmic lessons he needed to learn. At the same time, the success of his companies, particularly Tesla and SpaceX, was far from guaranteed. Elon was facing constant challenges from competitors, regulatory obstacles, and technological setbacks. The road was far from smooth. But despite all these challenges, Elon's belief in the importance of his work, the belief that humanity's future depended on the work he was doing, kept him moving forward. In many ways, this internal conflict and the ongoing struggle between his personal and professional life mirrored the themes of his karmic journey. Just as he had confronted obstacles in his childhood, in his relationships, and in his businesses, Elon now had to confront something even bigger, his purpose. But the more he tried to fight against these karmic patterns, the more he realized that it was futile. In fact, the universe had a way of teaching lessons, and they always came in the most unexpected ways. Elon's battle wasn't just with the world around him, it was with his own soul. It was during these moments of inner turmoil that Elon began to turn inward. He started to explore the idea of karma and how it could explain the repeating patterns he was encountering. The idea that his birthdate held the key to understanding his purpose began to take shape in his mind. Could it be that everything, his success, his failures, his relationships, was part of a grand design, a path laid out for him from the very moment he was born? In the face of failure, Elon began to question everything. Why was he facing so much adversity, even when he seemed to be doing everything right? Why were his relationships constantly falling apart? Was it possible that his soul was destined to go through these struggles in order to evolve? The pressure continued to mount, but it was also the spark that would push Elon to confront his deeper fears and begin the journey toward understanding his karmic path. He realized that every failure, every setback, and every personal loss was teaching him something crucial about who he was and what he was meant to do in the world. This period of internal conflict, however difficult, was just the beginning of Elon's deeper spiritual journey. Little did he know, the answers he was seeking about his life and his birthdate were just around the corner. But first, he would have to face even greater challenges, both within himself and in the world at large. Elon Musk had always been driven by a sense of purpose, but as he stood at the crossroads of success and failure, a deeper force seemed to propel him toward an even greater vision, a vision that would change the course of humanity forever. But to reach it, he would have to navigate a journey filled with obstacles, both external and internal. The stakes were higher than ever, and the challenges before him would test his resolve, his spirit, and his very belief in what he was trying to accomplish. As SpaceX neared the brink of collapse, Elon found himself facing the most daunting challenge of his career. The company was running out of money, and the pressure was mounting. His dream of making space travel accessible to the masses and ultimately colonizing Mars seemed to be slipping away, just when it was within reach. With each failed launch, the weight of the world pressed heavier on his shoulders. It was in these darkest moments that Elon's true character began to shine through. Instead of giving in to the fear and pressure, he doubled down. Determined to prove that his vision wasn't just a pipe dream, he pushed forward, not only with his work but with an unshakable belief that the universe was somehow guiding him toward a greater purpose. SpaceX's next launch was make or break. If it failed, there would be no more money. No more hope. But if it succeeded, it would change everything. Elon wasn't just battling the odds, he was fighting his own doubts, his fear of failure, and the realization that everything he had worked for might just come crashing down. In the quiet of his mind, he questioned whether his birthdate, which seemed to hold some mysterious significance, could somehow give him the answers he was searching for. Could his karmic journey be leading him to a greater revelation about his purpose? Was he destined for greatness, or was this simply a fool's errand? The day of the Falcon 1 launch arrived, a momentous event in the history of space exploration. The tension was palpable. As Elon sat in the control room, his hands trembling, the countdown began. With each passing second, his mind raced, wondering whether this would be the day that marked the end of his dreams. As the rocket soared into the sky, Elon's heart skipped a beat. The first stages of the launch seemed to go well, but then, disaster struck. A few minutes after launch, the rocket exploded, crashing to the ground. Elon was crushed. The failure was devastating, not just professionally, but personally. He had invested everything, including his own finances, into SpaceX. The loss of the rocket felt like the loss of everything he had worked for. Yet, in this moment of failure, something remarkable happened. Rather than retreating into despair, Elon took it as a challenge to push forward. He immediately began working on the next launch, determined to make it work no matter the cost. The path forward wasn't easy. The pressure from investors, from the public, and from his own internal voice was immense. But it was in this moment of crisis that Elon's true resilience emerged. He refused to quit. And in a way, this failure set the stage for a profound personal transformation that would not only affect the trajectory of SpaceX but would also reshape Elon's entire perspective on life, fate, and his karmic path. Meanwhile, on the personal front, Elon was facing another challenge: his relationships. As his work at SpaceX and Tesla grew, so did the strain on his personal life. The relentless pressure, combined with his deep internal struggles, was taking a toll on his marriages. His relationship with Tallulah Riley, his second wife, was now falling apart. The conflict between his professional ambitions and personal desires seemed insurmountable. Elon's growing disillusionment with his relationships was compounded by his own inability to find balance. As he poured more of himself into his work, he realized that he was losing sight of the very thing that he had once longed for, human connection. His tendency to isolate himself, to focus solely on his work, had alienated those closest to him. Despite his achievements, he was still grappling with a profound loneliness. But it was during this time of turmoil that Elon began to understand the deeper lessons of his life, lessons that seemed to be intricately tied to the very karmic path he had been walking. The relationship struggles, the business setbacks, and the constant feeling of being misunderstood all began to make sense in a new light. He was being forced to confront the parts of himself that he had long ignored, his vulnerabilities, his need for connection, and his fear of failure. As his journey continued, a new understanding began to form in his mind. Elon began to accept that his karmic path wasn't just about building companies or changing the world. It was about learning to balance his ambitions with his personal life, to reconcile his desire for greatness with his need for love and human connection. It wasn't an easy lesson, but it was one that he needed to learn in order to move forward. The breakthrough came when Elon finally realized that failure wasn't the end of his journey, it was part of the process. His karmic path was not one of perfection, but of growth. Every mistake, every heartbreak, and every challenge was shaping him into the person he was meant to become. The struggle wasn't a sign of weakness, it was an essential part of his evolution. With this newfound perspective, Elon's next venture was a success. SpaceX's fourth launch was a triumph, the rocket soared into space without incident. The world watched in awe as the company that had once seemed destined to fail had now succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. It was a turning point, not just for SpaceX, but for Elon Musk himself. The lessons he had learned through failure had finally come full circle, and his karmic journey had taken a significant step forward. But even as his companies were achieving great success, Elon realized that his personal journey was far from over. There was still much to learn about himself and his place in the world. The path ahead was still filled with challenges, both personal and professional, but he now understood that these challenges were not obstacles to be avoided, they were the very things that would help him grow. As SpaceX achieved the impossible, reaching orbit for the first time, Elon Musk's world began to shift. His triumphs were now undeniable. He was no longer just the eccentric tech visionary, he was an icon, a leader in the space industry. Yet, for all the success that SpaceX was enjoying, the emotional weight of Elon's journey had not been lifted. In fact, it had only grown heavier. The deeper Elon delved into his quest for knowledge, the more he began to sense a force at work in his life, something that was beyond his control. As the founder of PayPal, Tesla, and SpaceX, he had always prided himself on being a man of action, a problem solver who relied on reason and logic. But there were moments, especially after his public failures and private losses, when he couldn't help but wonder if his life was playing out according to some grand, karmic plan. It was during one of his sleepless nights in the aftermath of the Falcon 9 launch failures that Elon began to truly reflect on the idea of karma and how it might be guiding him. What if the lessons he had been learning, through his professional setbacks, his personal struggles, and even his relationships, were all part of a greater design? What if the pain, the failure, and the loneliness he felt were necessary steps to evolve into the person he was meant to be? The idea that his birthdate and karmic journey had some deeper meaning started to resonate with him in a way it never had before. The stars aligned, and Elon felt a subtle pull towards something he couldn't explain. He began reading extensively about karma, fate, and destiny. He read books about how people's birthdates could hold clues to their purpose in life. As he explored different philosophies, he realized that his own journey mirrored the stages of karmic growth, one of constant struggle, learning, and evolution. From the time of his youth, when he had dealt with bullies and feelings of isolation, to the unrelenting pressure he faced as an adult, everything seemed connected. The weight of his past mistakes, the failed marriages, the strained relationships, the moments of doubt, suddenly took on a new significance. Perhaps they were not signs of personal failure but lessons in disguise, lessons that he had to learn before he could move forward. The pain, the loneliness, the doubts, they were the catalysts for his growth. But what was the bigger picture? What was the ultimate truth he was meant to uncover? As he pondered these questions, the emotional climax of his journey arrived, an experience that would shake him to his core and forever alter the course of his life. It happened unexpectedly, in the form of a conversation with a close friend and mentor, who had been with him through much of his entrepreneurial journey. This individual was someone who had always believed in Elon's vision, even when others doubted him. Over dinner at one of Elon's favorite restaurants in Palo Alto, they spoke about everything: business, family, and the future. But this time, the conversation turned to something much more personal. The mentor, knowing the weight Elon carried from years of relentless work and personal sacrifice, asked him a simple but profound question: "Do you know why you're doing all of this, Elon? What is it that truly drives you?" For the first time in years, Elon paused. He had answered this question many times in the past, but now, at this moment, something inside him clicked. He realized that his driving force wasn't just about changing the world or making money, it was about seeking something greater, something more meaningful than he had ever acknowledged. He realized that his journey wasn't about building companies or amassing wealth, it was about discovering his purpose. He had been so focused on the external achievements, on proving the world wrong, that he had neglected the inner journey. The truth of his existence, and his karmic purpose, wasn't something that could be measured by his accomplishments, but rather by the lessons he was learning along the way. In that moment, a profound emotional release washed over him. Elon felt an overwhelming sense of clarity and understanding. His past failures, heartbreaks, and the relentless pressure of his work had not been meaningless struggles. They were experiences that had shaped him, that had forced him to grow, and that had brought him closer to understanding the truth of who he was and what he was meant to do. For the first time, he understood that his birthdate, the cosmic energy surrounding his life, had played a role in guiding him toward this realization. The karmic journey he had been on had been designed to push him toward self-awareness, humility, and compassion, not just for the world around him, but for himself. As the conversation ended and the dinner came to a close, Elon left the restaurant feeling lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. His journey, which had seemed like a series of disconnected trials, now made sense. Everything had led him to this moment of emotional clarity. A moment of true understanding about his life's purpose. In the weeks that followed, Elon began to approach his life and his work with a new perspective. He realized that his success wasn't just about achieving external validation or making history, it was about becoming the best version of himself. He had finally understood that his true purpose wasn't to be a savior of the world, but to inspire others by showing that even in the face of overwhelming odds, it was possible to evolve, grow, and ultimately find peace. But even with this newfound clarity, the journey was far from over. Elon had learned an important lesson, but there were still more challenges to face, more lessons to learn, and more personal growth to undergo. His relationships, both with others and with himself, would continue to be tested. But for the first time, Elon felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. His karmic path was no longer a source of confusion or frustration. It was a guide, helping him navigate the complexities of life with a deeper sense of purpose. The days that followed Elon's emotional breakthrough were filled with a sense of calm clarity. For the first time in his life, he felt as if he was standing at the intersection of two worlds, the relentless, fast-paced world of technology and business, and a quieter, more introspective one, where his soul could finally breathe. But with this new understanding came an inevitable question: what now? How would this newfound clarity change not only his personal life but also the course of his companies and the ambitious dreams he had set in motion? SpaceX, Tesla, and the rest of Elon's ventures continued to push forward, each of them benefiting from the lessons Elon had learned. The emotional weight that once held him back now served as fuel to propel his companies to new heights. Yet, despite the success, Elon's focus had shifted. He was no longer driven solely by the desire to conquer the world, he was now driven by a deeper purpose, to be a catalyst for change and evolution, not just in the world, but within himself. The first major shift came within his personal life. Elon had spent so many years chasing after external goals, building companies, making money, and leaving his mark on history, that he had neglected the very thing that had brought him joy in his earlier years: connection. The drive to prove himself to the world had caused him to isolate himself from the very people who mattered most. His relationships, both romantic and familial, had suffered as a result. But now, with his heart and mind aligned, Elon realized that his relationships were just as important as his ventures. He began to spend more time with his children, rekindling the bonds that had been strained by his obsessive work ethic. His relationship with his ex-wives and close friends also began to evolve. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension and unresolved issues, but there was a palpable shift toward openness, communication, and understanding. With this emotional healing came a renewed sense of purpose in his professional life. SpaceX's mission to make life multiplanetary continued to dominate his thoughts, but it was no longer just about reaching Mars. It was about ensuring that humanity's future was secure, that we learned from our past mistakes, and that we didn't repeat them. Elon now saw himself as a steward of the future, someone who could shape the direction of humanity for generations to come. But this vision was no longer just about technological advancement, it was about sustainability, about creating a better future for everyone. Tesla's advancements in electric vehicles and sustainable energy became even more personal for him. No longer was he just creating products for profit or prestige. He was making them for the future of the planet, for the health of the Earth and its inhabitants. His belief in the mission grew stronger each day, and he realized that in order to create the future he envisioned, he needed to also create a culture of collaboration and empathy within his companies. The people who worked alongside him were not just employees, they were his partners in the greater mission of change. Elon's karmic journey had led him to this point, where the realization of his dreams no longer came at the cost of his emotional well-being. The stress that had once ruled his life began to dissipate as he found peace with his role in the world. He now understood that failure was not a mark of shame, but a natural part of the process of growth. Each setback, each loss, had shaped him into who he was today, and this was a version of himself that was more in tune with the rhythm of life. He took time to reflect on the past and understand the deeper truths that had shaped his path. Looking back at his birth date and the significance of the numbers that had always followed him, Elon saw them in a new light. It was as if the universe had been trying to guide him all along, and he had finally started listening. His birth date, the timing of his successes and failures, the people who entered and left his life, it all seemed to be part of a greater design. The journey hadn't been easy. In fact, it had been far from it. But in each of the darkest moments, in each of the personal and professional crises, Elon had learned something invaluable. He had learned to embrace his imperfections, to understand that no journey is linear, and that true growth comes from facing the most difficult moments head-on. Through his trials, he had become a better leader, a better father, and, ultimately, a better human being. But this wasn't the end. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where Elon's purpose was no longer defined by the accolades or the companies he had built. Instead, it was about the legacy he would leave, not just in terms of innovation, but in terms of the impact he would have on the people around him. His personal growth, his ability to evolve emotionally, was the foundation for everything he would build in the future. His relationships with those closest to him began to improve as he practiced empathy and understanding. He reached out to former colleagues, mentors, and even those who had once doubted him. He sought forgiveness where it was needed, and he offered his own to others. No longer driven solely by the fear of failure or the need for approval, Elon was now motivated by something deeper, the desire to make the world a better place, for the people he loved and for future generations. SpaceX's goals began to align more with the greater good, as Elon's vision expanded beyond space travel to include sustainability and the protection of Earth's resources. Tesla's mission evolved as well, as Elon sought to create more than just electric vehicles. He wanted to create a movement, one that would inspire others to think about the future of the planet in a new way. As Elon continued to reflect on his journey, he understood that his karmic path was about finding balance. It was about understanding that success and failure were two sides of the same coin, that ambition and humility could coexist, and that his life was about more than just conquering the stars, it was about creating a lasting impact here on Earth. The lessons he had learned were profound, and he knew that the next phase of his journey would involve helping others find their own purpose. The realization that he had been guided by something greater than himself, the universe, fate, karma, gave him a new perspective on life. He had always believed that he was in control of his destiny, but now he saw that sometimes, life had a way of guiding us when we least expected it. The next chapter of Elon's journey would not be without its challenges. There would be more failures, more moments of doubt, and more personal trials. But armed with the wisdom he had gained, he knew that he could face whatever came his way with courage, clarity, and the understanding that the true measure of his life would be found not in his successes, but in the impact he had on the world and the people he loved. And so, the journey continued, one of growth, reflection, and the ever-evolving pursuit of a higher purpose. The future had always seemed like an uncertain, distant horizon to Elon Musk. But now, after all his personal revelations, the future no longer felt so far away. It was right in front of him, staring him down, daring him to rise to meet it. His newfound clarity gave him an edge, a perspective he had never had before. The drive to push boundaries was no longer simply about personal gain or achievement. The stakes had changed, now it was about survival, sustainability, and legacy. And just when he thought he had the path figured out, a new challenge arose, one that would test his resolve in ways he hadn't imagined. It all started when Tesla's latest battery innovation, which had promised to revolutionize the energy sector, faced unforeseen setbacks. The prototype, which had initially shown extraordinary potential, malfunctioned in a series of high-profile tests. The project, which had been touted as the key to a sustainable energy future, was suddenly at a crossroads. Elon sat in his office late at night, staring at the reports. He had invested so much of his energy, time, and hope into this project. Tesla had been hailed as the leader in electric vehicles, but the company had always been more than that. Tesla, for him, was a beacon of hope, a company with the power to reshape not only the transportation sector but also the world's approach to energy. This failure felt personal. It was not just about a product or a bottom line, it was about the dream of a sustainable future. He rubbed his eyes and looked out the window of the SpaceX headquarters, gazing at the sprawling California landscape. The problem wasn't just the failure of one prototype. It was the timing. Tesla's entire reputation was at risk, and so was the momentum that Elon had worked so hard to build. What was worse, the failure wasn't something that could be fixed by throwing money or technology at it. It was more profound. It was a challenge that seemed almost metaphysical. There were invisible forces at play, forces of doubt, fear, and negativity. Elon realized that this wasn't just a technical setback, it was a spiritual one. The universe, or karma, had put him in a position where his faith in himself, his companies, and his mission would be tested. And just like before, the challenge wasn't about the failure itself, it was about how he responded to it. In his earlier years, such a setback would have sent him into a spiral of frustration, pushing him to work even harder, to throw himself into solving the problem without considering the bigger picture. But now, things had changed. Elon knew that there had to be another way. He called a meeting with his top engineers and executives the next morning. The room was heavy with tension as the team discussed the failure. Everyone knew how critical this project was. It wasn't just about solving a technical problem, it was about preserving Tesla's reputation as a pioneer in the energy industry. Elon listened intently, absorbing all the information, but his mind was elsewhere. The energy in the room felt chaotic, almost like a storm waiting to break. After the meeting, Elon stepped outside for some air. He needed clarity. As he walked through the campus, his thoughts drifted back to the lessons he had learned in recent months. It wasn't just about moving faster, working harder, or controlling every detail of the situation. It was about trusting the process. It was about believing in the people around him and in the larger purpose of his work. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the cool California air to fill his lungs. For the first time in a while, he felt a sense of calm. What if this challenge, this failure, wasn't something to be feared but something to be embraced? What if it was the universe's way of pushing him and Tesla to a higher level of understanding? Maybe, just maybe, this was the test he had been waiting for, a test of his character, his resilience, and his ability to stay true to his purpose. He called a second meeting with his team, but this time, his approach was different. Rather than laying out a detailed action plan, he asked his engineers and designers to stop thinking about the problem as something that needed to be fixed immediately. Instead, he encouraged them to step back and reflect, on the process, on the lessons they had learned from the failure, and on the bigger picture of their mission. He encouraged them to trust that they could overcome this challenge together, as long as they remained focused on their shared vision. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at Tesla shifted. Rather than a team under pressure, they became a group united by a common goal. The engineers returned to the drawing board, not with the usual sense of desperation, but with renewed energy and creativity. Elon's message was clear: this was not just about a product. It was about the future. It was about the world they were trying to build. The breakthrough came when one of the engineers proposed a radical idea, an entirely new approach to battery design that didn't rely on the same assumptions as before. It was a risky move, but it was also a bold one. Elon, ever the risk-taker, approved it without hesitation. As the team worked tirelessly on the new design, Elon found himself reflecting on his own journey. This setback, like all others, had become a crucible, a testing ground for his evolution. Karma, in its mysterious way, had presented him with yet another challenge to overcome. But this time, he faced it with a sense of peace and determination that he had never known before. In the quiet moments before the breakthrough, Elon realized something profound: he no longer needed to be the one who solved every problem. His true power lay in his ability to inspire those around him, to build a team that could weather any storm, and to trust in the collective power of their shared vision. The Tesla battery breakthrough became one of the company's greatest successes, not because of the technology alone, but because it was the result of a new mindset, a mindset that prioritized collaboration, trust, and resilience over perfection and control. The lesson was clear: the universe doesn't always deliver success in the way we expect. Sometimes it delivers failure, but failure is only a stepping stone to something greater. As the breakthrough was announced to the world, Elon Musk stood before the cameras, a quiet smile on his face. He had faced yet another challenge, one that had tested his faith in himself, in his team, and in the larger purpose of his work. But through it all, he had come to understand the deeper truth about his journey: success wasn't just about winning, it was about evolving. And in that evolution, he had found something even more valuable than innovation: peace. Elon Musk sat in his office, reviewing the latest numbers from Tesla's new battery design. The breakthrough had been monumental, far beyond the initial expectations, and had placed the company in a stronger position than ever before. But as he looked at the reports, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing. Despite the success, despite the accolades, he knew the real challenge was not just technological or financial, it was personal. For the first time in years, Elon realized that his work, his ambition, and his drive were not enough to carry him through. His success could no longer be defined by the machines he built or the rockets he sent into space. It was time to turn inward. The next challenge was understanding the most complicated system of all: himself. Emotional intelligence, Elon mused, had never been his strong suit. He had always prided himself on his ability to think logically, to solve problems, and to work tirelessly toward his goals. But now, he was beginning to understand that his ability to connect with others, his empathy, his emotional awareness, was just as important as his technical genius. Perhaps, he thought, this was the next evolution of his journey, not to build a better machine, but to build a better Elon. He had been so focused on changing the world that he had overlooked the importance of emotional connection, the foundation of any successful relationship, whether with employees, partners, or family. Success in the workplace had always been defined by metrics, by profit margins and product launches. But now, he saw that true leadership was about something deeper, understanding the people he worked with, truly listening to their concerns, and fostering an environment where they could thrive not just as workers, but as human beings. As the weeks passed, Elon took steps to redefine his approach. At Tesla and SpaceX, he began instituting weekly meetings focused not on productivity or performance, but on well-being. He wanted to understand what was happening beneath the surface, to get to the emotional heart of his teams. He initiated company-wide initiatives designed to improve work-life balance, offered counseling services for employees, and even took the time to personally reach out to team members who had been struggling. It wasn't about making things easier, it was about making sure his employees were supported and felt valued as people, not just as cogs in a machine. It wasn't long before these efforts began to bear fruit. The energy at Tesla shifted from one of pressure and stress to one of collaboration and mutual support. People were more willing to share ideas, voice concerns, and engage in open dialogue with their leaders. Projects became more innovative, more cohesive. Elon could feel the change in the air, it was tangible. In the midst of this transformation, Elon also began to pay more attention to his own emotional well-being. For years, he had buried his feelings under a mountain of work. He had prided himself on his ability to push through adversity, to outlast the pressure, and to ignore his emotional needs. But now, with his increased awareness, he began to seek help. He took therapy sessions, began practicing mindfulness, and even made a concerted effort to build stronger relationships with his family. This shift was not without its challenges. Elon had grown accustomed to keeping his emotions in check, to showing only the side of himself that was focused, driven, and relentless. But as he began to explore his own emotional landscape, he was confronted with the parts of himself he had long avoided. The fear, the doubt, the vulnerability, they were all still there, buried under years of self-imposed pressure. But confronting these emotions wasn't as terrifying as he had expected. Slowly, as he worked through them, he realized that his emotional intelligence was just as important a tool for growth as his intellectual and technical skills. It was a tool that could transform not only his work but his life. Understanding his own emotions allowed him to connect with others on a deeper level, to lead with empathy, and to build a legacy that was not just about technology, but about humanity. His work-life balance improved as well. Where he once worked late into the night, fueled by exhaustion and ambition, he now made time for his personal life. He reconnected with his children, taking them on trips and spending time doing things they loved. For the first time in years, he felt as if he was present, not just physically, but emotionally. But it wasn't just his family that felt the shift. His romantic relationships, too, began to improve. As he became more attuned to his emotions, he was able to better understand the people around him, leading to more authentic and fulfilling connections. His ex-wives and previous partners noticed the difference as well. Though there was still healing to be done, the tension that once plagued his relationships began to dissolve. He was learning to communicate openly, to express his vulnerabilities, and to be the kind of person who could nurture a meaningful relationship. For Elon, this was the real breakthrough, not just the success of Tesla or SpaceX, but the realization that true leadership began with self-awareness and emotional growth. The companies he led were driven by innovation, but the people who worked for him were driven by something even more powerful, the desire to be part of something that valued them, understood them, and inspired them to grow not just as employees, but as individuals. Elon's reflection on his journey brought him to a startling realization: the work he had done to build Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures was only the surface of his true purpose. The deeper, more lasting change lay in his ability to impact the lives of those around him, to guide them, to lift them up, and to help them discover their own potential. As he moved forward, he understood that his legacy wasn't just about changing industries or making history, it was about helping others change their own stories. The world had always been his canvas, and now he saw that it wasn't enough to paint on it alone. The true masterpiece was in the people who helped him create it. And so, as he continued on his journey, Elon Musk knew that the path ahead would be full of new challenges. But this time, he felt ready. Ready not just to face the technical obstacles, but to confront the emotional ones as well. The next chapter of his life was one of emotional intelligence, personal growth, and building relationships that would last far longer than the companies he had built. The future was no longer a distant horizon, it was a living, breathing reality that he was shaping every day. Elon Musk had always been captivated by the stars, but now, more than ever, the cosmos felt like an intimate calling. The success of Tesla's new battery technology, coupled with his recent emotional breakthroughs, had given him a renewed sense of purpose. His mind, once solely focused on earthbound challenges, now soared toward the heavens. As the CEO of SpaceX, his mission had always been clear: make humanity a multiplanetary species. But the path ahead felt more urgent than ever before. In his heart, he knew that the survival of humanity, not just as individuals but as a collective species, depended on the steps they took now. As a boy, Elon had spent countless hours reading books about space, often dreaming of a future where humans could live beyond the confines of Earth. That vision had never left him. But now, with the reality of his success in creating reusable rockets and groundbreaking space technology, that dream was on the cusp of becoming a reality. It wasn't just an aspiration anymore. It was a necessity. The Earth was vulnerable, and while the focus had been on building electric cars and sustainable energy here on the ground, the next leap was interplanetary. The idea of Mars as a new home for humanity had taken on a new sense of urgency in the past few years. Global warming, political instability, and resource depletion were threats that couldn't be ignored forever. And while the work he had done on Earth, whether with Tesla, Neuralink, or Boring Company, was crucial, Elon felt the gravitational pull of space like never before. It wasn't just about sending rockets to Mars for the sake of exploration. It was about ensuring the survival of civilization itself. The race to make life on another planet sustainable wasn't just a personal goal anymore, it was an existential one. His vision for SpaceX was not just about launching rockets or setting foot on another planet, it was about building the infrastructure that would allow humanity to thrive in space. The goal was clear: colonize Mars, create a self-sustaining colony, and ensure that humanity had a backup plan, just in case things went awry on Earth. But getting to that point was no small task. The most immediate challenge lay in refining the technology needed to establish a human presence on Mars. The Mars mission had always been a goal, but with each setback, with every new problem that arose, it became clear that the road ahead would be even more difficult than expected. In the early days of SpaceX, the company had faced an uphill battle just to get its rockets into space. Now, the task was to take everything a step further, to ensure that the rockets could carry humans to Mars safely, to establish habitats on the Red Planet, and to find ways to produce food, water, and oxygen in an environment where nothing naturally existed. Elon had already taken major steps toward realizing his dream. SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9 rocket had revolutionized space travel, drastically reducing costs and paving the way for larger and more ambitious missions. But there were still miles to go before he could launch the Starship, SpaceX's flagship spacecraft designed for interplanetary travel. The Starship had undergone numerous tests, some of which had ended in spectacular failures, but Elon was undeterred. Failure was part of the journey, it was how he had learned to refine his ideas, to make them stronger. Even with his technical brilliance, Elon knew that the Mars mission would require more than just rockets and technology. It would require an entirely new way of thinking, one that blended science, engineering, psychology, and even philosophy. The psychological toll of living on another planet would be immense. How would humans cope with isolation, with the endless vastness of space, with the knowledge that they were millions of miles away from home? The idea of Mars as a new home for humanity had taken on a new sense of urgency in the past few years. Global warming, political instability, and resource depletion were threats that couldn't be ignored forever. And while the work he had done on Earth, whether with Tesla, Neuralink, or Boring Company, was crucial, Elon felt the gravitational pull of space like never before. It wasn't just about sending rockets to Mars for the sake of exploration. It was about ensuring the survival of civilization itself. The race to make life on another planet sustainable wasn't just a personal goal anymore, it was an existential one. His vision for SpaceX was not just about launching rockets or setting foot on another planet, it was about building the infrastructure that would allow humanity to thrive in space. The goal was clear: colonize Mars, create a self-sustaining colony, and ensure that humanity had a backup plan, just in case things went awry on Earth. But getting to that point was no small task. The most immediate challenge lay in refining the technology needed to establish a human presence on Mars. The Mars mission had always been a goal, but with each setback, with every new problem that arose, it became clear that the road ahead would be even more difficult than expected. In the early days of SpaceX, the company had faced an uphill battle just to get its rockets into space. Now, the task was to take everything a step further, to ensure that the rockets could carry humans to Mars safely, to establish habitats on the Red Planet, and to find ways to produce food, water, and oxygen in an environment where nothing naturally existed. Elon had already taken major steps toward realizing his dream. SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9 rocket had revolutionized space travel, drastically reducing costs and paving the way for larger and more ambitious missions. But there were still miles to go before he could launch the Starship, SpaceX's flagship spacecraft designed for interplanetary travel. The Starship had undergone numerous tests, some of which had ended in spectacular failures, but Elon was undeterred. Failure was part of the journey. It was how he had learned to refine his ideas, to make them stronger. Even with his technical brilliance, Elon knew that the Mars mission would require more than just rockets and technology. It would require an entirely new way of thinking, one that blended science, engineering, psychology, and even philosophy. The psychological toll of living on another planet would be immense. How would humans cope with isolation, with the endless vastness of space, with the knowledge that they were millions of miles away from home? And so, the journey toward Mars continued. Elon Musk knew that the road would be long, fraught with difficulties, failures, and uncertainty. But in that uncertainty, there was something he had come to understand: true progress was born not from certainty, but from the willingness to push past it, to venture into the unknown and build a future that would sustain humanity, both here and beyond the stars. The journey was just beginning. Stay tuned as Elon Musk and his team take the next bold step into the cosmos. What will they encounter on the road to Mars, and how will they shape the future of humanity? The adventure continues. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The hum of SpaceX's rocket engines filled the room as Elon Musk stared out of the window, watching the Falcon 9 rocket ascend into the sky. The successful launch was a huge milestone for his company and the future of space exploration. Yet, as he stood there in the quiet aftermath of the event, a part of him felt restless, a deep sense that there was something more to his mission than the rockets, the spaceships, or the ambitious goal of reaching Mars. He had always believed that to make a real difference, you needed to solve problems that mattered, problems that could shape the future of humanity. The rockets and the technology were just the tools. The true legacy he sought to build, the one that would outlast him, was something much deeper. Elon's true test, he realized, was learning to trust not only in his own vision but in the people around him, his team, his partners, and ultimately, the global community that was becoming increasingly reliant on his innovations. In the early days of SpaceX, trust had been a scarce commodity. Elon had operated as a one-man army, forging ahead with little regard for the limitations of the people around him. But as SpaceX grew, so too did his understanding of leadership. He had learned that his genius alone would never be enough to reach the stars. He needed to trust others to take the journey with him. This was the next great challenge, learning to let go of control and build a team that could share his vision, that could carry the weight of the mission forward without his constant guidance. Trusting others to make decisions, especially when the stakes were so high, was something that did not come easily to Elon. He was a perfectionist, and his standards were stratospheric. But the weight of his goals demanded something more, a collaboration of minds, a collective effort. He turned back toward the conference table, where his key team members were discussing the next steps in the development of Starship, the massive spacecraft that would one day carry humans to Mars. They were a diverse group, engineers, designers, scientists, but they all shared one thing in common: their commitment to the mission. Elon's decision to trust them had paid off in many ways, but it wasn't without its challenges. It wasn't just about hiring talented people, it was about fostering an environment where they felt safe to take risks, to challenge the status quo, and to innovate without fear of failure. His head of engineering, Susan, was passionately outlining a new concept for Mars habitat construction. "We've been focused on the rocket itself, but we need to start thinking about the people who will be living on Mars. They need to be safe, comfortable, and self-sufficient. We're not just sending explorers. We're sending the future of humanity," she said, her voice steady but full of conviction. Elon nodded. It was moments like this, when someone else's idea lit a spark in him, that made him realize how far he had come. The old Elon, the one who insisted on doing everything himself, might have pushed aside Susan's suggestion, believing only his way could work. But now, he was beginning to see the value of letting others lead. The people around him were more than just employees, they were collaborators, visionaries in their own right. "I agree," Elon said, turning toward the whiteboard where Susan had laid out the concept. "But we need to be practical. We can't afford to make any mistakes here. This is where we build a legacy, not just rockets. What do you think will be our biggest hurdle in making this happen?" Susan paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the diagrams on the board. "It's the materials," she said finally. "We'll need to develop a sustainable way of creating building materials on Mars itself. Transporting everything we need from Earth is simply too expensive." Elon's mind raced. This was the kind of thinking he needed, innovative solutions to impossible problems. It wasn't just about technology or rockets anymore, it was about the very systems that would allow humans to thrive on Mars. But how could they build a civilization on another planet when everything was so unpredictable? As he listened to Susan, it became clear that they were facing a dilemma that would define their future. Would SpaceX continue to push the boundaries of technology and innovation, or would they fall short of the challenge because they couldn't trust in their own ability to solve these monumental problems together? The question lingered in his mind as he walked away from the meeting, and as he drove home later that evening, the enormity of his task weighed heavily on him. The Mars mission had always been about the future of humanity. But now, it had become something more personal, a test of his leadership and his ability to build something that would endure. He thought about the early days of SpaceX, when he had barely managed to scrape by, when failures seemed inevitable. It had taken everything he had just to keep the company afloat. There had been times when the pressure was so immense that it seemed like the universe itself was conspiring against him. But through it all, one thing had remained true: his relentless pursuit of the future. And yet, now, the challenge was different. The universe was no longer an abstract goal or a mere objective, it was the very stage on which his legacy would play out. If he wanted to succeed, he had to build a foundation of trust. Not just with his team but with the world. He couldn't afford to treat this as another technical project. It was about creating a new society, a new way of life, for humanity to survive and thrive. That night, Elon spent hours going over old letters and documents, notes from early meetings at SpaceX, sketches from his first ideas for electric cars, even pages from his journals. As he read, he saw patterns emerging, patterns of failure, yes, but also of growth. His company had grown from a scrappy startup to a global powerhouse. But the next step, the most critical one, would be different. It wouldn't be about how many rockets they launched or how much money they made. It would be about how much they trusted each other, how much they were willing to risk and sacrifice to make that future possible. In the weeks that followed, Elon made a conscious decision to shift his approach. He would still lead with passion and vision, but he would lead differently. By listening more, by building relationships, by empowering others to take the reins. He began to delegate more, trusting his team to make decisions, even when the stakes were high. As he did, something remarkable happened. SpaceX began to grow not just in size, but in spirit. The employees who worked alongside him no longer felt like they were merely following instructions, they were part of something bigger, something that had the potential to change the world. The real work was just beginning, but Elon knew that by trusting the people around him, by fostering an environment of collaboration and mutual respect, SpaceX could achieve the impossible. Together, they could push the boundaries of what was possible, not just in technology, but in humanity itself. As he looked up at the stars that night, Elon Musk understood that the road ahead was never going to be easy. But with trust, with belief in each other, and with a shared commitment to the future, they would reach heights beyond imagination. And so, the journey continued. The rocket engines roared, and the stars seemed a little closer. But now, for the first time, the journey wasn't just about the technology. It was about the people who would get them there. The sun was beginning to set over the SpaceX launch facility, casting long shadows over the dusty grounds. Elon Musk stood at the edge of the complex, gazing up at the towering structure of Starship, the colossal spacecraft that he had spent years dreaming about. It was a strange feeling, knowing that the very ship that had once existed only in his mind was now a tangible reality. The journey that had brought SpaceX to this point had been long, filled with immense challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. Yet, here they were, standing on the threshold of humanity's next great leap. But as always, the road ahead was not without its hurdles. Elon felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as he watched the team prepare for the next phase of testing. This was not just any spacecraft, it was the key to SpaceX's future, the vehicle that would carry humanity beyond Earth and into the stars. For years, Elon had been obsessed with making space travel affordable, sustainable, and, ultimately, accessible to everyone. He had no illusions about the challenges they faced, but he was more determined than ever to see this mission succeed. The Starship had been designed to be fully reusable, capable of carrying both crew and cargo to destinations like Mars, the Moon, and beyond. It represented everything that SpaceX had worked for, the convergence of innovation, technology, and audacity. It wasn't just about the mission to Mars anymore, it was about the future of humanity in space. It was about the possibilities that lay ahead, about turning the impossible into the possible. However, as Elon walked toward the test bay, his mind was already focused on the next set of challenges that lay ahead. The testing of the Starship was only the beginning. The real question, the one that had kept him up at night, was whether or not they could actually create a sustainable human presence on Mars. It was one thing to land on Mars, but it was another thing entirely to stay there, living, working, thriving, and ultimately creating a self-sustaining colony. For that, they would need far more than just a rocket. They would need to solve an endless array of logistical, environmental, and biological problems. Elon had always known that Mars was a harsh and unforgiving place. The atmosphere was too thin, the gravity was weaker, and the weather was volatile. But the biggest challenge wasn't the environment, it was the human capacity to adapt to such a radically different world. The psychological toll of living in isolation, millions of miles away from Earth, was a question that had long haunted him. How could they possibly expect people to thrive in an environment that was, by all accounts, inhospitable to life? In meetings with his team, he had emphasized this point over and over again. We need to think about this in terms of creating a new civilization, not just a space mission, he had told them. We're not just sending people to Mars to plant a flag and leave. We need to think about how they'll live there, how they'll eat, how they'll communicate, how they'll maintain their mental health. It was a point that often left many in the room looking uneasy. The scale of the task was so immense that it was difficult for many to wrap their minds around it. Yet, Elon had always prided himself on dreaming big, on believing that nothing was impossible if they had the right resources and the right mindset. This wasn't just about technology, it was about redefining what humanity was capable of. But, as with all of Elon's ventures, the clock was ticking. The world was changing, and the problems on Earth, climate change, political instability, and resource depletion, were growing more urgent by the day. The need for a backup plan, a plan that involved not just survival but the possibility of thriving beyond Earth, had never been clearer. For Elon, the stakes had become existential. He wasn't just trying to make money or build a company anymore. He was trying to ensure the future of the human race. As he stood there, watching the test crew go over the final checks, Elon's thoughts turned inward. He thought about his own journey, how his early failures had shaped him, how his obsession with reaching the stars had led him to this point. He had been called an eccentric, a madman, even a visionary by some. The path he had chosen had not been easy. There were moments when he had doubted himself, when the weight of his dreams had seemed too heavy to bear. But looking out at the starship, seeing the team working tirelessly to bring this dream to life, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. This was the culmination of everything he had worked for. Yet, the work was far from over. The next phase of testing would determine whether the starship could handle the immense pressure of interplanetary travel. There were risks, of course. The ship could fail during its maiden voyage, and that would be a huge setback. But Elon had learned to live with failure. In fact, he had come to embrace it. Failure wasn't the end, it was just another step in the process of improvement. If Starship failed, they would learn from it, adapt, and try again. It was this mindset, more than anything else, that had allowed SpaceX to achieve the incredible feats it had. Whether it was landing rockets vertically or developing reusable spacecraft, SpaceX had pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and they had done it by refusing to accept failure as final. This was the spirit that Elon had instilled in his team, a belief that every setback was an opportunity to innovate, to get better, and to come closer to the goal. As the hours passed and the final preparations for the Starship test continued, Elon's mind turned once again to the bigger picture. What would it mean for humanity to reach Mars? What kind of world would they build there? Could they create a society that was truly sustainable, where humans could live without the support of Earth? The implications of this mission went far beyond just science and technology. It was about creating a new way of life, a life that transcended the borders of Earth. In a way, Elon realized, this was not just about reaching Mars, it was about reaching the stars, about proving that humanity was capable of achieving the impossible. This was his legacy, the mark he would leave on the world, and the world beyond. As the Starship continued its preparations, Elon Musk stood there, quietly contemplating the future. He knew the journey would be long and fraught with challenges, but he was more determined than ever to see it through. The space race was not just about rockets or technology, it was about humanity's future, and he was willing to do whatever it took to ensure that future included the stars. And so, the journey to Mars continued, one step at a time. The next chapter in the story of humanity's future was waiting, and Elon Musk was ready to take it on, no matter the cost. Elon Musk had never been afraid of the unknown. In fact, it was the unknown that had always driven him, the thrill of solving problems that no one else thought were solvable, the challenge of breaking through barriers that others said were unbreakable. But as he sat in the quiet of his office, staring at the long list of hurdles ahead for SpaceX, he felt the weight of leadership more than ever. The ambitious Mars mission was no longer just a futuristic idea, it was an imminent reality, and with it came the enormous responsibility of guiding SpaceX through uncharted territory. His fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the desk as he thought about the path that had led him here. From the early days of starting PayPal to building Tesla and then launching SpaceX, Elon had always been focused on innovation, pushing the envelope of what technology could achieve. But as SpaceX grew, the stakes grew higher, and the burden of leadership became increasingly complex. It was no longer just about being the visionary, it was about making the hard decisions, rallying a team through adversity, and finding the strength to keep moving forward when the future seemed uncertain. In recent weeks, Elon had been feeling the strain of balancing his multiple roles as CEO of both Tesla and SpaceX. The pressure of ensuring both companies thrived was a constant weight on his shoulders. Tesla's electric vehicles were transforming the automotive industry, and SpaceX was on the brink of changing humanity's place in the cosmos. But at what cost? There were moments when Elon felt like he was stretched too thin, his energy divided between two companies, each requiring his undivided attention. Elon's mind wandered back to a conversation he had had with his close advisor, Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO. They had discussed the growing pains of the company and the next phase of the Mars mission. "Do you ever feel like we're running out of time?" Gwynne had asked, her voice calm but tinged with concern. "We've been pushing for so long, and now it feels like everything is happening so fast. We're on the verge of something huge, but what if we're not ready?" Elon had stared at her, sensing the same anxiety that had been creeping up inside him. The stakes were higher now than they had ever been. The test flights for Starship were approaching, and the timeline for Mars was drawing closer with every passing day. The risks were monumental, and the margin for error was razor-thin. "I've always believed that we have to aim for the stars, even if we miss," Elon had replied. "But it's not just about us, Gwynne. It's about humanity's future. And if we don't make this work, I'm afraid that future will be in jeopardy." The weight of those words had stayed with him, and now, sitting alone in his office, the reality of that statement hit him harder than ever. He was no longer just leading a company, he was leading the charge for the survival of the human race beyond Earth. The responsibility was immense, and it often felt overwhelming. Elon thought about the enormous challenges that lay ahead. Space travel was fraught with danger, and Mars was an environment unlike any other. The harsh conditions on the red planet, its thin atmosphere, the dust storms, the lack of liquid water, meant that every detail of the mission had to be meticulously planned. The team had worked tirelessly to develop the technology, but the true test would come when humans actually set foot on Mars. It wasn't just about sending people there, it was about ensuring that they could survive, thrive, and eventually build a sustainable colony. And there was another challenge that weighed heavily on Elon's mind, the human cost. The people who would be part of the Mars mission were not just pioneers, they were volunteers, people who would be willing to risk everything for the chance to be part of something bigger than themselves. It was a concept that fascinated him, but also kept him up at night. How could he, as the leader, convince these brave individuals to take that leap of faith? And how could he live with the responsibility of sending them into such a dangerous, uncertain future? Elon had always been motivated by the belief that humanity needed to become a multiplanetary species to survive, but the reality of that vision was beginning to hit home in a more personal way. Every decision he made, every test flight, every setback, and every success would have a direct impact on the lives of the people he had come to care for, the engineers, scientists, and astronauts who had become more than just colleagues. They were a family, bound together by a shared vision of the future. As he sat in the quiet of his office, Elon thought about the human element of the Mars mission. He knew that he couldn't do it alone, he needed the support of his team, the trust of his partners, and, most importantly, the faith of the astronauts who would be the first to take the leap. They were willing to risk everything, but Elon knew that it was his responsibility to ensure that they had the tools, the support, and the technology they needed to succeed. Their lives depended on it. The sound of his phone ringing interrupted his thoughts, and he looked down to see that it was Gwynne. He swiped to answer, his voice weary but resolute. "Elon, I just got off the phone with NASA," Gwynne said. "They're ready to partner with us on the Mars mission. They're willing to provide some resources, but they want us to meet certain benchmarks before we move forward." Elon sat up straighter, feeling a spark of hope. "What kind of benchmarks?" "They want to see successful test flights for Starship, both for crew and cargo. They want us to demonstrate that we can handle the logistics of a sustained human presence on Mars. It's a big ask, but it's a step forward." Elon rubbed his eyes, processing the information. This was a huge opportunity. NASA's partnership would bring credibility to the mission, and it would provide the resources needed to push the project to the next level. But it also meant more pressure, more milestones to meet, and more risk. "All right," Elon said after a long pause. "We'll meet those benchmarks. We have no choice. But we have to do this the right way. No shortcuts." Gwynne's voice was calm but firm. "I know. And we will. We're all in this together. As he hung up the phone, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. The path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty, but he knew that they were on the right track. The weight of leadership was heavy, but it was a weight he was willing to bear, for the sake of the mission, for the sake of the people, and for the future of humanity. The journey to Mars was a challenge unlike any other. But Elon Musk was ready to face the unknown, no matter the cost. And with his team by his side, they would push forward, one step closer to making the impossible possible. Elon Musk knew that in the world of space exploration, setbacks were inevitable. But even knowing this, the weight of failure could still feel unbearable. As the team at SpaceX prepared for another critical test flight of the Starship, the stakes had never been higher. With the world watching, with NASA now involved, the pressure to succeed was unrelenting. And yet, despite all the work, the setbacks had begun to pile up, one after another. It all started with a routine test of the engines. On paper, everything should have worked. The team had spent months preparing, refining the design, and ensuring that every detail was perfect. But on the day of the test, something went wrong. The test flight that was supposed to validate Starship's engine systems failed, sending a shockwave of disappointment through the entire SpaceX team. Elon stood in the control room, watching the test footage as the engineers frantically analyzed the data. He felt a sinking feeling in his stomach, his heart beating faster with every passing second. The failure was bad. Very bad. He had hoped that this test would be the breakthrough they needed, but instead, they were back at square one. Do we know what happened? Elon asked, his voice calm but laced with tension. The lead engineer, who had been working around the clock, glanced at him with a mix of frustration and resolve. It looks like there was an issue with the fuel system. We're still running the diagnostics, but it's clear that we won't be able to launch for at least another month while we fix the problem. A deep sigh escaped Elon's lips. The delay was crushing, not just for SpaceX, but for the future of humanity's ambitions in space. With the world looking to them to solve one of the most audacious problems of the century, colonizing Mars, it felt like each failure added more weight to the burden he carried. He turned to Gwyn, who was standing quietly at his side, her expression unreadable. "What now?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "We fix it. We learn from this. We come back stronger," she said simply. Elon nodded, but inside, he felt like the walls were closing in. This wasn't just about rockets or engineering, it was about the fate of his vision, the future of space exploration, and the very future of humanity beyond Earth. Every failure felt like a personal one, every setback another crack in the foundation of his dream. That night, Elon couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts in his head. He knew the road to Mars wouldn't be easy, but this latest setback had cut deeper than the others. SpaceX had faced challenges before, engine failures, rocket explosions, and financial struggles, but this time felt different. They weren't just building a rocket anymore, they were trying to create a new civilization on a distant planet. If they couldn't even get the technology right here, on Earth, what hope did they have for Mars? But then a thought crossed his mind. Failure wasn't the end, it was part of the journey. This was something he had learned over and over again. Each failure brought them one step closer to success. The only real failure was quitting, and that was not an option. The next morning, Elon called a meeting with the entire SpaceX team. It wasn't just about reviewing the failed test flight, it was about getting back on track, recalibrating their minds, and finding the strength to move forward. "We've hit a bump in the road," he began, his voice steady but firm. "And I'm not going to pretend that it doesn't suck. But here's the reality. This is the price of doing something that no one has ever done before. We are trying to solve problems that no one else even knows how to solve. And that means we're going to fail. A lot." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of the engineers, scientists, and technicians. Their expressions were a mixture of exhaustion and determination. But failure is part of success. It's the best way we learn. So, we fix the problem. We figure out what went wrong. And we come back stronger. We don't give up. Not now. Not ever. The room was silent for a moment. And then, one by one, the team began nodding, their spirits lifted by Elon's unwavering determination. They knew that the road to Mars wasn't going to be smooth, but they also knew that they were part of something bigger than themselves. This wasn't just a company or a mission, it was a movement. A movement that would change the course of human history. The engineers went back to work, diving into the data to understand the failure and find the solution. Elon, meanwhile, spent his days visiting the test sites, checking in with the team, offering support, and making decisions that would keep the project moving forward. He was no longer just a CEO, he was a leader in the truest sense of the word, guiding his team through the toughest times with unwavering faith in their ability to overcome. Weeks passed, and the team made significant progress in fixing the issues with the fuel system. The delays were frustrating, but they had used the time wisely, making refinements and improvements to Starship's design. By the time the next test flight was scheduled, the tension in the air was palpable. Elon and his team knew that this was their chance to prove to the world, and to themselves, that they could succeed. The day of the test arrived, and Elon stood in the control room, watching the countdown. His heart was racing, his mind focused. He knew that this was the moment that could make or break everything. The engines roared to life, and the Starship lifted off the ground, soaring into the sky. This time, everything went flawlessly. The engines fired perfectly, and the rocket continued its ascent, reaching new heights. Elon allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but he knew that the mission wasn't over yet. There were still many more challenges ahead, but this was a victory. A hard-earned victory. When the test flight was complete and the Starship successfully returned to Earth, the team erupted into cheers. Elon stood quietly at the back of the room, a slight smile on his face. He knew this was only the beginning. But it was a crucial step forward. As he watched his team celebrate, Elon felt a deep sense of pride. They had faced failure and come out on the other side stronger. They had proved to themselves, and to the world, that they were capable of achieving the impossible. The road to Mars was still long, but SpaceX had taken another step toward turning the dream into reality. And Elon knew that no matter how many setbacks they faced, they would continue to push forward. Because in the end, that was the true test of faith, not just in the technology, but in the people, the vision, and the belief that anything was possible. The journey to Mars had taken another leap forward, and with it, humanity's hope for a future beyond Earth. The path ahead was still uncertain, but the team at SpaceX had proven that with determination, resilience, and an unwavering belief in their mission, anything was possible. For the first time in years, Elon Musk felt the creeping doubt that every leader, no matter how successful, inevitably experiences. It had started out small, an uncomfortable nagging sensation at the back of his mind, like a distant storm threatening on the horizon. But over time, that feeling grew stronger, louder, more impossible to ignore. The pressure of the Mars mission was beginning to show cracks in the foundation of SpaceX, and Elon was now facing something far more dangerous than a technical failure, a crisis of confidence. It wasn't just one thing. It was everything. The recent success of the test flight had given the team a much-needed boost, but the road ahead was fraught with even more perilous challenges. The stakes were higher now, with more money, resources, and lives on the line. NASA was invested, the world was watching, and the pressure to deliver was suffocating. For a moment, Elon found himself asking, what if we fail? The cracks first began to appear within his own team. The culture of SpaceX had always been one of relentless innovation, where no failure was too big to learn from, and no obstacle too great to overcome. But lately, Elon had sensed a shift. There were more disagreements, more tension in the air. The engineers and the leadership team, people who had once been united by a shared vision, were beginning to feel the strain. The pressure to perform was taking its toll. Gwynne Shotwell, always the pragmatic counterpart to Elon's idealism, was the first to confront him. "Elon, we need to talk," she said one morning, her voice calm but serious as they stood in the bustling SpaceX headquarters. "There's a growing sense of unease among the team. People are starting to wonder if we're pushing too hard. There's talk of burnout." Elon's heart sank. Gwynne wasn't one to bring up such matters unless they were serious. She knew the stakes better than anyone, and if she was sounding the alarm, it meant the situation was worse than he had realized. "I know," Elon said, rubbing his temples. "But we can't afford to slow down. The world is depending on us. I understand that. But we can't keep working people into the ground. We need to find a balance." "If we burn out the team, we won't get anywhere," Gwynne replied. "I'm worried that if we don't address this soon, we could lose some of our best people. People who are key to this mission." Elon was silent for a long moment, watching the engineers and technicians in the distance, their faces reflecting the same exhaustion he felt. He knew they had been pushing hard, working around the clock. The mission to Mars was no small feat, it was the culmination of everything SpaceX had ever strived for. But he also knew that this kind of pressure couldn't be sustained forever. He had to do something, or the team might collapse under the weight of it all. "I'll address it," Elon finally said, his voice resolute. "We'll take some time to reevaluate. I won't let this destroy what we've built." But even as he said the words, a deep sense of unease lingered. The realization had set in that perhaps he had been so focused on the end goal that he had overlooked the cost of getting there, the people who were making it all possible. And in his pursuit of pushing the boundaries of human achievement, had he forgotten the very human element that was at the heart of SpaceX's success? That evening, as Elon sat alone in his office, reviewing the data from the latest round of tests, the weight of the realization settled heavily on him. There was no easy way to fix the situation. It wasn't just about solving a technical issue, it was about healing a culture that was starting to fray at the edges. He had always prided himself on being able to push the limits of what was possible, but now he was faced with a sobering question: could he push too hard? The following morning, Elon called a meeting with the entire SpaceX leadership team. He was determined to make a change, but it wouldn't be easy. The first step, he knew, was to be honest with everyone about the challenges they were facing. "Look, I won't lie," Elon began, addressing the team. "We've been pushing so hard, trying to get this mission to Mars off the ground, and I know that some of you are feeling the strain. We've hit a point where we need to reassess, take a step back, and make sure we're not burning ourselves out. I've made the mistake of thinking that the mission was everything, when, in reality, it's the people who make the mission possible. We can't afford to lose the very people who are making this dream a reality." There was a silence in the room as the leadership team absorbed his words. For a moment, it felt like a weight was lifting, as though Elon's vulnerability had cracked open a door to a much-needed conversation. "We've built something incredible here, but we're only as strong as the people who are working alongside us. So, we need to find ways to support each other better, to ensure that everyone is working at their best, not just for the mission, but for themselves." It was a difficult conversation, but one that needed to happen. Elon had always been known for his relentless drive and his ability to inspire those around him, but now he was realizing that inspiration wasn't enough. He needed to show that he valued his team not just as workers, but as individuals who had their own dreams, their own lives outside of SpaceX. They needed balance, support, and the space to breathe. As the meeting concluded, Elon felt a small spark of hope. This was a crucial moment. The team's faith in the mission and in each other had been shaken, but with the right approach, they could rebuild it. They could emerge from this stronger and more united than before. But it would require a shift in how they approached their work. They would need to redefine success, not just as a successful Mars mission, but as a sustainable, healthy company that put its people first. Weeks passed, and Elon worked tirelessly to implement changes within SpaceX. He began setting boundaries for himself and for the team, creating clearer communication lines and offering more opportunities for collaboration. He introduced days off to allow employees to recharge and focused on celebrating small wins along the way, rather than only celebrating the big ones. Slowly, the atmosphere at SpaceX began to shift. People seemed more energized, more motivated, not because the work was any less difficult, but because they felt supported. But despite the progress, Elon knew that the journey ahead was far from easy. The challenges of reaching Mars were as daunting as ever, and the road ahead would test the team in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But one thing had become clear. If they were going to succeed, it wouldn't be because of one person's vision or one company's ambition. It would be because they were united in purpose and ready to face the impossible together. As the next test flight of Starship approached, Elon couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. This wasn't just about rockets and engines anymore. It was about a team, a family, working together to accomplish the greatest feat humanity had ever attempted. And with their renewed confidence, they were ready to push forward into the unknown. The journey to Mars had become something more than just a mission. It was a testament to the strength of the human spirit, one that, despite setbacks, doubt, and fear, could rise again. As the journey to Mars continued, Elon Musk and the SpaceX team encountered another significant challenge, one that wasn't as tangible as a rocket malfunction or an engineering failure, but perhaps more profound, an ethical dilemma. As SpaceX and Tesla pushed the boundaries of technology, they were constantly faced with decisions that questioned not only the future of humanity but also the morality of their work. The latest project was a development that had long been on the drawing board, an autonomous, artificial intelligence-powered spacecraft designed to make deep space exploration far more efficient. If successful, it could reduce the time and cost of sending supplies to Mars and beyond. However, there was a growing debate about the potential consequences of using such technology. Critics raised concerns about the implications of creating autonomous AI systems capable of making life-or-death decisions. Could they be trusted? Were they safe? It all came to a head during a late-night meeting with his team, where Elon was faced with the harsh reality of his ambition. The stakes were much higher than just getting a rocket to Mars. Now, they were venturing into uncharted territory, where the consequences of failure weren't just financial, but potentially catastrophic. "We're at a crossroads," Gwynne Shotwell said, her voice serious. "I know you've always been about pushing the limits of what's possible, but we're entering an area where we have to ask some tough questions. Are we certain that AI is the right path? What happens if something goes wrong? If an autonomous system makes the wrong decision?" Elon sat back in his chair, the weight of her words settling in. His mind was already racing through the possibilities, how the technology could revolutionize space exploration, but also the risks that came with it. The ethical concerns were not just hypothetical anymore, they were real. He glanced around the room at his leadership team, who were all deep in thought. Everyone in the room had worked tirelessly toward the dream of Mars, but now they were forced to confront the possible fallout of their own innovations. The line between groundbreaking achievement and dangerous recklessness was thin, and Elon had to make the call. "I get what you're saying," Elon replied, his voice quiet but resolute. "But think about the bigger picture. Space exploration isn't just about getting to Mars. It's about creating a future where humanity survives, where we're not dependent on one planet. AI could help us get there faster. If we're going to be a multiplanetary species, we need these tools. We need the ability to think bigger and faster." There was a long silence. The room felt tense as everyone absorbed Elon's words. But then, one of the engineers, a young woman named Rachel, spoke up. "Elon, I agree with you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But we have to be aware that we're dealing with something that could spiral out of control. We're creating systems that can learn and adapt, and once we give them control, we can't always predict what they'll do. We're not talking about a small glitch, we're talking about something that could change the course of history. What happens if an AI makes the wrong decision and it's too late to fix it?" Elon knew that Rachel's concerns were valid, and he could feel a knot forming in his stomach. His ambition to create the future was undeniable, but there was something deeply unsettling about the idea of handing over too much control to a machine, something that could go wrong in ways no one could foresee. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I've always believed that we can solve problems with technology. And I still believe that. But I also know that the road we're on isn't without risks. I'm not blind to that. The question is not whether we can achieve this. It's whether we can do it responsibly. Maybe it's time to slow down and think about this more carefully. Not just for the mission, but for the world we're building." The team nodded in agreement, the weight of the decision hanging in the air. It was a delicate balance, one that required careful thought and an understanding of the potential consequences, not just for SpaceX, but for humanity itself. Would the benefits of the AI outweigh the risks, or was it a step too far? Elon wasn't sure, but one thing was certain: they needed to tread carefully. In the days that followed, Elon took a step back, reviewing the project from every angle. He consulted with experts in artificial intelligence, ethics, and philosophy, seeking a deeper understanding of the potential risks. He wanted to be sure that they weren't just building the future they envisioned, but a future that was safe and ethical for generations to come. As the team continued to debate the path forward, Elon found himself struggling with the very nature of progress. Innovation had always been his driving force, but now, he had to ask himself if the price of that innovation was too high. Was the desire to push the boundaries of human achievement worth the potential harm it could cause? During one of his late-night conversations with Gwyn, Elon shared his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Elon admitted, rubbing his eyes as the weight of the decision continued to weigh on him. "We've always been about getting to Mars, but now I'm wondering if we've been so focused on the destination that we've forgotten to consider the impact of the journey. I've never been one to shy away from risk, but maybe this is different. Maybe we're venturing into territory that we can't control." Gwyn looked at him thoughtfully, her expression softening. "I think that's a question we all need to ask ourselves," she said. "We're trying to change the course of humanity's future, but we have to do it in a way that respects life, both on Earth and beyond. We can't afford to lose sight of our values." It was a sobering conversation, and one that Elon hadn't anticipated. The mission to Mars was no longer just a race to colonize a new world. It was about creating a future that balanced progress with responsibility, ambition with caution. As the leader of SpaceX, Elon realized that his role wasn't just to drive innovation forward. It was also to make sure that innovation didn't come at too great a cost. As the team moved forward with the project, Elon made a crucial decision: they would take a more cautious approach with the AI system, involving more oversight and checks to ensure that it would be safe for long-term use. They would work closely with ethicists and AI experts to develop guidelines that would govern the use of the technology, ensuring that the mission to Mars would not come at the expense of humanity's moral compass. For Elon, this moment marked a turning point. The road to Mars was still long, but it was clear that the true challenge was not just about technology. It was about the kind of future they were building. And with that knowledge came the responsibility to ensure that the path they chose would be one that led to a better world for all. The journey to the stars wasn't just about rockets and AI, it was about making sure that the humanity they sought to carry with them into the future would remain just as humane as the one they left behind. It was a crisp morning in the heart of Silicon Valley, but inside the SpaceX command center, the air felt thick with tension. After weeks of careful preparation, the team was ready for a critical test flight, the first of its kind for the new Starship design that Elon and his engineers had poured their hearts into. It was a monumental moment, one that had the potential to shift the trajectory of their Mars mission. But as with every groundbreaking venture, there was the ever-present shadow of risk. Failure was an option, but it was one they were trying desperately to avoid. As the countdown clock ticked away in the background, Elon stood at the front of the control room, his face a mask of quiet intensity. His usual confidence, the sharp, optimistic energy that had carried SpaceX through countless challenges, was tempered today. This wasn't just another test flight. This was the test, the one that would determine whether their years of research, sleepless nights, and mounting sacrifices had been worth it. And yet, no matter how much preparation had gone into this moment, there was always the possibility of failure. "This is it," Gwyn Shotwell said beside him, her voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight of seriousness. "We've done everything we can. Let's see if it works." Elon gave her a brief nod, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking of the team, the families, the billions of dollars in investment, and the impossible dream they were chasing. They had come so far, but one test, one mistake, could change everything. The launch began without issue. The powerful engines roared to life, lifting the massive starship off the ground and sending it soaring into the clear morning sky. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect. The ground team exhaled in relief as the rocket climbed steadily, the test phase progressing as planned. But as the rocket reached its highest point, something unexpected happened. A slight, but unmistakable, shudder ran through the spacecraft. A warning light blinked on the control panel. The engineers at their stations exchanged quick, concerned glances, but Elon's expression remained unchanged, focused, determined, even as he recognized the all-too-familiar signs of a malfunction. "Engine failure," one of the lead engineers announced. "We've lost thrust on one of the Raptor engines." The room immediately descended into chaos. It wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was far from ideal. Starship was designed to be reusable, and this failure, if not addressed, could cause the rocket to plummet back to Earth far earlier than intended. "We've got to abort this mission," Gwyn said urgently, her voice sharp. Elon's gaze was fixed on the readouts. His mind was calculating, weighing the options, finding the balance between quick action and keeping the mission alive. "No. Hold the line," Elon said, his voice low but resolute. "We can't pull the plug just yet. Let's see if we can stabilize the flight." The room was silent as the engineers scrambled to respond, trying to keep the failing engine from derailing the entire mission. Elon's heart raced, his thoughts darting in multiple directions. If they lost this test, they would have to start from scratch. The entire team had been working for this day, and failure, despite the risks inherent in space exploration, was not an option he was willing to entertain just yet. Minutes felt like hours as the team worked frantically. The shaking of the spacecraft was becoming more pronounced, and everyone knew the situation was deteriorating fast. Finally, the moment of truth arrived. The remaining engines had stabilized, and the rocket was managing to maintain some level of control. The engineers had managed to divert some power to compensate for the lost engine, and Starship was once again climbing higher, albeit slower than intended. "Stabilized," the flight director said with a sense of cautious optimism. "It's not ideal, but it's holding." Elon let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. His pulse was still racing, and his mind was a blur of calculations and contingencies, but for the moment, they had averted disaster. As the Starship continued its trajectory, Elon allowed himself to look around the room. The tense, high-stakes atmosphere was shifting, there was hope now, a sense that they had a chance to bring it home. But the battle wasn't over yet. For the next few minutes, everything seemed to go in slow motion. The rocket reached its peak altitude, then began its descent back to Earth. A part of Elon's mind was still calculating, trying to predict every variable that could go wrong. He'd always known that the road to Mars would be fraught with danger, but he had also known that they would succeed because they were learning from every failure. And this test, while far from perfect, was another learning opportunity. The descent was the true test. Would they be able to land safely with the engine failure in play? 5 minutes to landing, the flight director called out. The room held its breath. The next few moments felt like a blur. As the rocket came closer to Earth, Elon watched with a focused intensity. He could see the re-entry process taking place, the flames of friction streaking across the sky, the rocket's velocity slowing, and then the final moments. Starship, still steady despite the damage, began to descend toward the landing pad. And then, it happened. The rocket touched down, landing, but with a jolt. The crowd in the command center erupted in cheers, but Elon could barely hear them over the thunderous beating of his own heart. The landing was rough, but it was successful. Against the odds, they had made it. Landing successful, the flight director announced, confirming what everyone had already seen. The rocket, damaged but intact, had landed safely. Elon stood there for a moment, a sense of relief washing over him, but also an overwhelming realization. This was a win, but it was a fragile one. There was so much to learn from this test, so much to refine and improve. They had avoided disaster, but they hadn't overcome every challenge. The road to Mars, as always, was going to be filled with peril. Gwyn approached him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and admiration. "Well, we made it. But we both know this is just one battle. We're not out of the woods yet." Elon nodded slowly, his mind already moving to the next phase. "Yeah, but this battle proves something. What we're building here is real. We're closer than we've ever been." The test flight had proven that SpaceX's dreams of reaching Mars were not only possible, but also within grasp. The team had weathered another storm, and while the challenges ahead were daunting, the success of this flight marked a pivotal moment in their journey. It wasn't just about rockets or technology. It was about resilience. The test had revealed the true spirit of SpaceX. Not just a company that could build powerful rockets, but a team that could come together in the face of adversity and push forward, no matter how many times they were knocked down. And as Elon stood there, watching the rocket on the landing pad, he couldn't help but think of the people who would be a part of this historic journey. People who, just like him, were willing to take risks, challenge the impossible, and set their sights on a new horizon. Mars was closer than ever before. And the mission, against all odds, was still on track. The night after the successful but harrowing test flight, Elon Musk sat in his office, staring at the screens that displayed the steady stream of data from the mission. The landing was a triumph, but it wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was in his world. SpaceX's path was always lined with obstacles, and even the smallest failures could send ripples through everything they had worked for. His fingers drummed on the edge of the desk, the weight of the next steps pressing down on him. As the days passed after the test flight, the excitement of the successful landing began to wear off, revealing a new set of challenges that were as much about the people as the technology. Elon had always thrived on the cutting edge of innovation, but now, as the pressure to lead a team of hundreds intensified, he found himself grappling with the human element of the mission. There was a growing sense of tension in the air, unspoken words, divided opinions, and at times, a palpable frustration that hung like a storm cloud over SpaceX headquarters. It wasn't that Elon lacked a vision. His ambition had always been the driving force behind the company, propelling it forward at breakneck speed. But now, he was realizing that the true test of leadership wasn't about technical achievements or the development of groundbreaking rockets. It was about how to manage the human factor. The people who made the mission possible and who would ultimately bear the burden of the risks that came with it. One morning, during an all-hands meeting, Elon addressed his leadership team, sensing the growing divide. "I know things have been tense lately," he began, standing in front of a room filled with some of the most brilliant minds in the world. "We've achieved a lot, but we're also facing challenges that go beyond just building rockets. The pressure is mounting. And we're all feeling it. But we can't let that get in the way of what we're trying to accomplish. Mars is within reach, but only if we work together, without distractions." There was a long pause in the room. Everyone knew that the stakes had never been higher, but they also knew the pressures of working for Elon Musk. The relentless pursuit of progress, the constant drive for perfection, and the desire to change the world often created a volatile atmosphere. Musk was not just a visionary. He was an intense leader who demanded a lot from those around him. That intensity was part of what had made SpaceX so successful, but it also created cracks in the foundation. Are we pushing too hard? Gwyn Shotwell, SpaceX's president and a key figure in the company's success, spoke up, her tone more serious than usual. "I know we're all committed to the mission, but sometimes, I worry that the pressure is starting to affect the team. We've lost good people to burnout before. If we don't address this, we might lose more. Elon met her gaze, sensing the weight of her words. Gwyn had been with him from the early days, when SpaceX was a small, scrappy company with big dreams and no real resources. She understood the toll that the mission took on people, physically, emotionally, and mentally. She had seen the brilliant minds burn out, the exhaustion from pushing limits, and the toll that long hours and impossible expectations had taken on the team. "I don't want to burn anyone out," Elon said, his voice quieter than usual. "But we can't slow down now. We've come too far. We need to push harder, not just for the mission, but for the future of humanity. I believe in all of you, and I know you can handle this. But we can't afford distractions. Mars is out there, waiting." The room remained silent, each person processing Elon's words in their own way. They understood the stakes. Mars wasn't just a dream for Elon, it was a mission that could change the course of human history. But the pressure to succeed was suffocating. It wasn't just about rockets, it was about the human cost of that success. How much was too much? Later that evening, as Elon walked through the headquarters, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He had built SpaceX into the powerhouse it was today, but now, he was facing a more personal challenge, balancing the intense ambition that had brought him this far with the well-being of the people who had helped him get there. The next day, he called a meeting with Gwyn, the heads of engineering, and a few other key leaders. "I've been thinking," Elon said, pacing back and forth in the room. "I know we've all been pushing hard. But I'm starting to wonder if we're asking too much from the people here. Maybe it's time we take a step back and look at how we're approaching this mission." Gwyn raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we need to rethink our pace," Elon said, his voice full of uncertainty. "I know we've been working around the clock, but I'm starting to think that we're losing something in the process. We're pushing innovation at breakneck speed, but are we losing sight of the people behind it? Are we making the right trade-offs?" Gwyn, as always, was quick to process. "Elon, I get that. We've all seen the burnout, the stress. But the question is, can we afford to slow down? There's so much at stake. If we take our foot off the gas now, we risk losing our lead." Elon nodded. "I know. But maybe we don't need to slow down completely. Maybe we need to be smarter about how we approach this. Maybe we need more collaboration, more breaks, more space for the team to breathe. We've always focused on innovation, but if we don't take care of the people who are driving it, we might lose our edge." The group fell silent, each of them considering Elon's words. The pressure they all felt was undeniable, but the toll it was taking on the people working tirelessly to make SpaceX's dreams a reality was something they couldn't ignore. "I think you're right," said one of the engineers, a longtime SpaceX team member. "We've been pushing so hard that we haven't been looking after each other. We need to remember that we're all in this together, and sometimes, it's not just about the next breakthrough. It's about making sure we're in a place where we can keep going." Elon took a deep breath. "All right. Let's change the way we approach things. We can still push hard, but we need to make sure that we're not burning out the very people who are making this all possible." The decision to address the human factor wasn't easy for Elon, but it was one he knew was necessary. Leadership, he realized, wasn't just about driving innovation and pushing the team to meet impossible goals. It was about creating a culture that supported the well-being of everyone involved, where each person could thrive, not just survive. The new approach wasn't going to be easy, and it wouldn't be quick. It would require changes to their processes, a shift in the company's culture, and perhaps most importantly, a shift in how Elon himself led. But as he sat in his office later that night, thinking about the path ahead, he felt a sense of clarity. Mars was still within reach, and the mission hadn't changed. But the road to get there was about to be a little bit different, a little more balanced, a little more sustainable. And maybe, just maybe, that would make all the difference. The next few months after Elon's decision to recalibrate SpaceX's approach were a whirlwind. The team was recharged, and the new focus on balancing productivity with mental well-being was already showing signs of improvement. There was a renewed sense of energy in the halls of SpaceX headquarters. Engineers were collaborating more effectively, the mood in the cafeteria was lighter, and for the first time in a long time, the work felt sustainable. But as with any grand endeavor, calm never lasts long. One rainy Tuesday morning, disaster struck. A security breach had occurred, something that had never happened before. The system alerts rang through Elon's office, loud and shrill, disrupting the usual tranquility that had taken over after the recent adjustments. For a moment, he couldn't make sense of what was happening. His screen flashed red as the alerts poured in. "Sir, we've detected a breach in the Falcon Heavy Control System," an assistant said through the intercom, his voice trembling with urgency. "It looks like there's been an unauthorized access to our secure servers. This is big." Elon stood up abruptly, his mind racing. This wasn't just a small incident, this could be catastrophic. If someone had gotten access to SpaceX's confidential plans, designs, or even communication systems, the consequences could be far-reaching. The breach could compromise everything: intellectual property, security protocols, and worse, the upcoming missions. His first instinct was to assemble the team. He picked up the phone and called Gwyn, who had been in constant touch with Elon about the broader direction of the company. She picked up immediately, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Elon, what's happening? We just got the same alerts." "The breach, it's not just any hacker, is it?" "No," Elon said, rubbing his temples, his mind working at a rapid pace. "This is different. Whoever did this had very specific knowledge of our systems. We need to figure out how far the breach has gone before it's too late." A team of cybersecurity experts was immediately brought in to assess the damage. Hours of intense analysis revealed something even more troubling than anticipated. The breach wasn't just some external attack, it was a sophisticated, inside job. The hackers had carefully avoided detection, gaining access to sensitive information about SpaceX's plans for Mars. They had pinpointed the Starship prototypes, flight trajectories, and even private communications detailing the next few missions. "Someone on the inside is involved," one of the cybersecurity experts said grimly, breaking the silence. "We're not just dealing with a hacker, we're dealing with someone who knows the system inside and out." The word struck Elon like a punch to the gut. The trust that he had placed in his team, the people he'd fought for and led for years, was being questioned. The thought that someone within SpaceX might have betrayed them was a bitter pill to swallow. For a moment, he was paralyzed by the implications. The last thing he ever wanted was to betray the culture of trust and camaraderie he had worked so hard to build. "We can't panic," Elon said, though his voice carried an edge of frustration. "We need to contain this. Find the leak, and stop it before it spreads any further. We're not going to let this sabotage the mission." But as the hours ticked by, the situation worsened. The breach seemed to be just the tip of the iceberg. The cyber team discovered traces of sabotage within the Starship's flight software, a backdoor code that could disrupt future missions. It wasn't just a leak of information, it was an intentional act of malice, one that could jeopardize the entire future of their Mars missions. Elon knew they had to act fast. The longer the intruders remained inside the system, the greater the risk of them launching a full-scale attack. It wasn't just the financial and technical damage at stake anymore, it was their very survival. If they couldn't root out the mole, the mission could be derailed indefinitely. It was then that he realized the full gravity of the situation. Not only did he have to deal with the external threats to the company, but the erosion of trust from within was the most dangerous challenge of all. How could he rebuild the foundation of SpaceX when it felt like everything was crumbling beneath him? As the investigation continued, Elon pulled in his core leadership team, people who had been with him since the very beginning, and asked them to help him solve the crisis. "Gwyn, I need your help with this. We have to get to the bottom of this. We need to find out who's responsible, and why," Elon said, his voice strained. "I'll get to work on it immediately," Gwyn replied, her voice calm despite the turmoil. "I'm with you on this." For the next few days, the atmosphere at SpaceX headquarters became unbearably tense. The team sifted through reams of data, tracking the source of the breach, questioning every possible lead. Elon spent sleepless nights at the control center, working with his cybersecurity and engineering teams, trying to piece together the puzzle. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. There were moments of doubt. What if they didn't find the mole in time? What if the sabotage ran deeper than anyone realized? The constant pressure to protect the mission, protect his people, and protect SpaceX's future seemed like an impossible task. As the hours wore on, Elon found himself questioning everything he had built, every decision, every move, and every bit of trust he had extended. In one of the late-night strategy meetings, as Elon and Gwyn were reviewing the most recent findings, a breakthrough came. One of the engineers, a quiet and detail-oriented individual, had discovered an unusual pattern in the data logs. After further investigation, they identified an employee who had accessed the compromised systems in ways that raised suspicion. The mole was found, a senior engineer who had worked at SpaceX for over a decade. Elon knew this person well, and the revelation hit him like a punch in the gut. "What's his motive?" Elon asked, his voice a whisper, struggling to come to terms with the betrayal. "We don't know yet," Gwyn replied, her face pale. "But we'll get to the bottom of it." Elon nodded grimly. He understood that this was not just a betrayal of the company, it was a betrayal of the very ideals that SpaceX stood for. The trust that had bound them together had been shattered, and it would take time to rebuild. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the sabotage had been done for financial gain, with a competing aerospace company at the center of the scheme. But that didn't make the betrayal any easier to accept. In the end, SpaceX was able to mitigate the damage. They managed to remove the backdoor code and secure their systems, but the emotional toll was deep. The company had suffered not only a technical crisis but a crisis of faith. Elon knew that the road ahead would require him to rebuild trust, not just with his team but with the world that was watching. As the chapter closed, SpaceX had weathered yet another storm. They had protected their mission, but the damage to their foundation would take time to heal. Elon's leadership had been tested in ways he had never expected. But as always, he was undeterred. The journey to Mars was far from over, and the road ahead was still long. After the crisis was averted, a sense of uneasy calm returned to SpaceX. Elon Musk, though visibly exhausted, was resolute in his determination to move forward. The betrayal that had threatened to derail everything he had worked for, from the very core of the company, had been a wake-up call. It was one thing to face external obstacles, like technical failures or industry skepticism, but to confront the internal threat of a trusted individual betraying the mission was a different kind of pain altogether. For weeks, SpaceX was in recovery mode. The breach had shaken the company's core, but the team had rallied, working tirelessly to not only fix the vulnerabilities exposed but to heal the rift within their ranks. Trust had been fractured, but not irreparably so. Elon knew that if SpaceX was going to survive this, it had to be stronger, more united than ever. Gwyn Shotwell, as always, was a pillar of strength during this turbulent time. She had been instrumental in navigating the crisis, helping to stabilize the company both in terms of security and morale. She and Elon worked closely to implement new protocols, ensuring that such a betrayal could never happen again. One quiet afternoon, as Elon sat at his desk, reviewing updates from the engineering teams, he found himself lost in thought. It wasn't just about rockets anymore. The mission had evolved beyond the technology, the ambition, or even the dream of reaching Mars. The true measure of success, Elon realized, wasn't just about conquering the stars, it was about the people who would follow him there. The employees who believed in the mission, the ones who sacrificed their time, their personal lives, to make the impossible possible. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The road had been long and often treacherous, but he was finally starting to see the bigger picture. The mission, after all, wasn't just about him. It was about humanity as a whole. It was about offering hope, about creating something greater than the sum of its parts, a future for the generations to come. It was a new beginning, a new era of leadership that Elon had to embrace. He realized that, even as he pushed for progress and innovation, he also had to nurture the very people who made it all possible. SpaceX wasn't just about rockets, it was about fostering a culture of trust, collaboration, and resilience. As he thought about this, his phone buzzed with an incoming message from Gwyn. Meeting in 30 minutes. We've got an update on the Mars timeline. Elon sighed, knowing that the work was far from over. The company had made progress, but there was still the looming question of the Mars mission. What would it take to make the dream a reality? Would SpaceX be able to conquer the next obstacle, the biggest one yet? He arrived at the meeting room, where the key leaders of SpaceX were already gathered. There was an air of excitement, but also a hint of nervous anticipation. The news that Gwyn had promised to deliver was big, perhaps the biggest update of all. If this worked, everything would change. Elon, we've finalized the launch window for the first crewed mission to Mars, Gwyn announced, her eyes gleaming with excitement. The window opens in just under 18 months. We're ready. The room erupted into applause, but Elon was quiet, staring at the table. It was hard to fathom the enormity of what had just been said. 18 months. That was all they had. The road to Mars was no longer just a distant dream. It was about to become a reality. The entire company had poured their blood, sweat, and tears into making this moment happen. Now, the world would be watching to see if they could deliver. 18 months, Elon muttered under his breath, his mind racing through all the technical and logistical challenges that lay ahead. This is it. This is what we've been working toward. But even as the team celebrated, Elon felt the weight of what was to come. The risks were enormous, nothing about this mission was guaranteed. And yet, as he looked around at the faces of his colleagues, the ones who had stood by him through the darkest moments, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time: hope. It was a strange sensation for Elon, who had spent most of his life focused on the next big thing, the next challenge, the next innovation. He had always been driven by the pursuit of the impossible. But now, as he looked at the people who had worked alongside him, he understood that the journey to Mars was not just about a rocket or a planet, it was about what they had created together. In the coming months, the team worked tirelessly to meet the ambitious goal. There were still setbacks, of course. Rockets exploded in testing, schedules slipped, and finances were stretched thinner than ever before. But through it all, there was a sense of unity, a shared belief that they were on the cusp of something historic. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, Elon's confidence in the team grew. They were no longer just a group of individuals working for a common cause. They had become a family, bound together by the shared dream of reaching Mars. It was a dream that no one had ever believed could be accomplished. But now, after all the hardships, the setbacks, and the betrayals, they were on the brink of achieving the impossible. Elon sat in his office late one night, watching as the final preparations for the crewed mission to Mars took shape. The rocket gleamed in the hangar, ready for its journey. The first human crew was already in training. And though there were still many obstacles to overcome, Elon knew they were ready. He thought back to everything that had led them here, the early days at SpaceX when success seemed like an impossible dream, the failures, the betrayals, the breakthroughs, and the countless sleepless nights. All of it had led to this moment. The first crewed mission to Mars. He looked out the window, watching the stars twinkle above, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to dream. It wasn't just about rockets, or SpaceX, or Mars anymore. It was about humanity's potential. It was about the hope of something bigger, something better, for the future. The journey to Mars was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?